Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Welcome to this new edition of Business Africa. I'm your host, Afolake Onyiloye. The top stories this week. Equatorial Guinea earns an investment-grade credit rating, but governance and economic challenges still cast a shadow over future stability. From crisis to crust, a Congolese startup reinvents pizza using cassava flour, turning local agriculture into a recipe for resilience and growth. As raw cashew export are suspended, Burkina Faso prioritizes local processing to create jobs, reduce cost and unlock more value from its prized crop. Oil-rich Equatorial Guinea has achieved an investment-grade credit rating, a promising development. But governance and structural economic issues continue to raise concerns about the country's long-term recovery.
Equatorial Guinea, one of Africa's leading oil producers, is drawing fresh scrutiny from investors. It recently secured an investment-grade credit rating, BBB, for the long term and A2 for the short term, both with a stable outlook. A closer look reveals persistent structural challenges, delayed government payments, low governance scores, and a sluggish economic recovery continues to weigh heavily on investor confidence. Reports from Transparency International and the Mo Ibrahim Index point to a sharp disconnect between these ratings and the actual investment climate. Governance remains a sticking point. Declining transparency and democratic backsliding are amplifying skepticism. In response, authorities are now pursuing public finance reforms backed by the IMF and the African Development Bank. These efforts focus on better debt management and anti-corruption initiatives, though questions remain how quickly and effectively they'll be implemented. By the end of 2023, government revenue, 82% of it from oil, had risen 32% since 2019, reaching $2.84 billion. Spending climbed by 30%, driven largely by infrastructure and administrative costs. Public debt remains under 70% of GDP, but arrears linger in sectors like construction and banking. As Equatorial Guinea rolls out its 2035 National Development Strategy to move beyond oil, investors are now asking a fundamental question: is meaningful reform finally taking root, or is the risk still too great for sustained investment?
To unpack this further, we're joined by Soraya Diallo, Senior Vice President and Rating Director at Bloomfield Investment Corporation. Welcome to the show. Now, what key factor led to Equatorial Guinea's BBBA2 rating despite concerns over governance and the economy?
Effectivement, cette note peut sembler un peu surprenante parce que jusqu'à
Indeed,
présent,
this
la
rating
Guinée
may come as a
équatoriale était
surprise,
considérée
given
comme un
that
pays
Equatorial Guinea
non
has
seulement
long been
très
seen
fermé,
as a very
mais
closed
aussi
and
un pays à
high-risk
risque
country
en
due to its
raison
heavy
de
reliance on
leur
oil.
forte concentration, notamment sur le pétrole. Je pense qu'il est important déjà de comprendre
However,
que la
it's
notation
important to understand that financial
se base
ratings
sur
are based
un
on a
ensemble
combination of quantitative and
critères
qualitative criteria
quantitatifs
used
et
to guide our
qualitatifs, donc
analysis
sur
and
lesquels nous nous
decision-making.
appuyons pour faire nos travaux d'analyse et pour attribuer la note. Donc sur le plan qualitatif, notamment, vous
On the
l'avez dit,
qualitative side,
nous
we
avons
identified and
constaté
discussed several important
et
reforms
discuté un
that have
certain nombre
already
de
begun
réformes
to be
très
implemented.
importantes qui ont été prises et qui ont
These
commencé
discussions
d'ailleurs à être
involved the
mises en
ministers of
œuvre
Economy and
en Guinée
Finance, as well
équatoriale.
as development
Donc, ces
partners like the
discussions ont
African
eu lieu
Development
avec
Bank
les
and the
différents
International
ministres
Monetary
de
Fund,
l'économie, des
who
finances,
are
avec
supporting the country in
également
this
les
reform
bailleurs,
process.
donc la BAD, le FMI qui accompagne le pays dans la mise en œuvre de ces différentes réformes. Et nous pensons vraiment que ces réformes qui
We
sont très
believe these significant
significatives
reforms
vont
will help
permettre
trigger a new phase
d'amorcer
of
une
economic
nouvelle
momentum.
dynamique de l'économie. Sur le plan quantitatif,
On the
la Guinée
quantitative
équatoriale
side,
est un pays qui
Equatorial
est
Guinea
très
has a very low
faiblement
debt level,
endetté.
around
Aujourd'hui, ce pays a
37%
un
of
niveau
GDP,
d'endettement
which
qui est
is well
autour
below
de
the regional
37%,
threshold of
très en
70%.
deçà de la norme régionale qui est de 70%. Et le plus important, c'est
More
que cette
importantly,
dette,
this
elle
debt
est
is
surtout
primarily
interne. Donc, c'est
domestic,
une
owed
dette
to
qui
national
est
private
envers le
sector
secteur
actors
privé
and local
national,
financial
envers
institutions.
le marché financier régional. Donc, c'est une notation in fine qui relève non seulement la
Ultimately, this
volonté de
rating
l'État
reflects not just
à
the
faire
government's
face à ses
willingness,
engagements,
but
mais
also
surtout
its
cette
ability to meet its
capacité-là.
financial
Parce que,
commitments.
in fine, la notation financière mesure la capacité d'un pays à pouvoir faire face à ses engagements et à sa dette. Et aujourd'hui,
Equatorial Guinea
Guinée
currently has the capacity to service its debt, which remains very limited.
Qui est encore une fois très très minime.
What reforms could help improve these ratings and what could trigger a downgrade?
L'État a encore un niveau.
One major issue is the significant backlog of domestic arrears, particularly to the construction and banking sectors.
Et ça, c'est vraiment un gros
This represents a serious bottleneck for economic recovery.
Donc, une fois que ces
Once the state clears these arrears and undertakes a meaningful restructuring of public financial governance, including how it contracts and pays its service providers, both the banking and private sectors should be better positioned to resume financing the economy.
Paye ses différents partenaires et fournisseurs, je pense que le secteur bancaire et le secteur privé pourront de nouveau reprendre le financement de l'économie. Et ça, c'est très important. Et l'autre point, bien sûr, c'est...
Another key area is the effective diversification of the economy, which remains overly reliant on oil.
Sur le pétrole.
Several sectoral projects are currently underway, especially in agriculture, aquaculture, livestock and electricity.
Au niveau de l'agriculture, la pisciculture, l'élevage, également au niveau de l'électricité, qui, comme je le disais,
the country also aims to export its electricity and enhance its telecommunications sector.
Exporter également la qualité de ces télécoms. Donc, nous allons également suivre.
We will continue to closely monitor how Equatorial Guinea implements this economic diversification and how well it develops the identified new growth sectors.
Soraya, thank you so much for those insights.
You're welcome. Thank you, Afulake.
Faced with rising wheat prices, a Congolese startup turned crisis into opportunity, crafting pizzas from cassava flour. The innovation not only slashed costs, but tapped into Africa's vast cassava potential.
Pizza made with cassava flour, that's the bold and original idea from a Congolese startup specializing in corporate catering. Faced with an economic crisis triggered by the skyrocketing price of wheat due to the war in Ukraine, the company turned to local resources to survive. What began as a daring experiment has now blossomed into a real opportunity. The war in Ukraine drove up the cost of wheat flour and made imports more expensive. That's when we thought, why not use local products that could help reduce our dependence on imported flour? Wheat flour is very costly for us, but cassava flour is cheaper. So our production costs dropped and our profits increased. As of 2021, Africa produced approximately 204 million tons of cassava, nearly 60% of the world's total production, and with African countries spending around $85 billion annually on food imports, including 15% on wheat alone, cassava represents a major strategic advantage. It offers a powerful opportunity for the continent to reduce reliance on imports and invest in food sovereignty. The 100% cassava pizza is a hit with customers impressing many from the very first bite. It was only after I finished eating that Mr. Yan Othia told me I had just eaten cassava. I was shocked and said, but I don't eat cassava. And he replied, exactly, that's the point. We want you to enjoy it first, and only then realize it was made with cassava flour. Meanwhile, Africa's appetite for pizza continues to grow. In West Africa alone, the market is projected to expand at a compound annual growth rate of 8.2% from 2024 to 2032, fueled by rapid urbanization and a youthful population.
Burkina Faso has suspended raw cashew nut exports in a strategic push to encourage local processing. The goal: create jobs, lower costs, and keep more of the economic benefits at home.
In 2023, cashew was Burkina Faso's second largest agricultural export. It generated 60.9 billion CFA francs. Yet in an effort to increase the value of this precious product, the authorities suspended raw cashew exports to secure the local supply on the 2nd of April.
The suspension of cashew exports obviously benefits processors. Every time we try to coordinate with traders, we end up being behind schedule compared to their yearly plan. So this decision works in our favor.
With more local supply, vendors and processors are able to purchase cashews at more affordable prices, helping them to maintain profitability and diminish the risk of shortages. The suspension of cashew exports helps us because we're now able to sell at lower prices. The quantity of cashews we used to sell for 500 CFA will now increase. The Dumukafa Fund has allocated 500 million CFA francs to support cashew processing units as part of government efforts to boost the sector. In 2024, the African cashew market was valued at approximately $823 million, with projections indicating it will grow to $1.24 billion by 2034. According to the United Nations, Africa accounts for about 45% of global cashew production, totaling around 1.2 million tons annually.
That brings us to the end of this edition of Business Africa. Thank you for watching. For more in-depth business stories and the latest updates, stay tuned to Africanews or visit us at any time at africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.